Welcome back, my fellow Python programmers, to a brand new video, and in this one we're going to be looking at functions in Python. So if at any point you feel that you're enjoying the contents of this video, please make sure to slap that like button and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this is an example that shows the simplest structure of a function. The first line uses the keyword def to inform Python that we are defining a function. This is the function definition, which tells Python the name of our function, which is in this case hello world. Next, we have the parentheses that hold information that a function might need, and we'll see later on how we can send information to that function. Of course, in this case, there is no information needed for this function, so we left it empty. Finally, the definition ends with a column, something that you always have to remember to put there. Now, notice that after that, we have an indented line. This is similar to the indentations that we've seen with for loops and while loops and if statements. So every single function, or actually this is called the body of a function. This is a block of code that is executed when a function is called. And speaking of function calling, here we have the hello world. This is where we actually call the function. So now if I right click and I run, you'll see that I get hello world printed out. Now, something else you might have noticed is that I left two spaces below this function. Sometimes people leave only a single space. You might see this a lot, but if you do that, you'll notice that we have a little yellow squiggly line. This is just a simple warning, and if I run the code, you'll see that nothing happens. But if I hover over it, you can see that it's PEP 8, 305 expected 2 blank lines. So this is what the gods of Python want us to do. They want us to leave 2 blank lines after a function, and also if there's anything above the function as well. So if I say like message equals 1, whatever, you'll notice that also we have this warning because expected 2 blank lines above it. One single line doesn't do it. 2 blank lines are needed above and below a function. Now let's look at what happens when we actually pass information into a function. So notice that now we provide the function with a name to print, and we use that variable inside using an f string to print something out. If you don't remember how to use the f string, you can always go back to the video that I will mention above about variables, printing out strings, etc. And notice that we have an error in here. If I right click and I run, and I try to run this, you can see that hello world is missing one required positional argument name to print. So we said that this function takes in some information that is the name to print, and we're calling this function without providing that name. So we need to pass a name into hello world, and I'm going to pass in my own name, that is Michael. So now when we right click and we run, you'll see that I get hello Michael. So these are called parameters and arguments. This right here is called the parameter. Sometimes it's referred to as an argument. These are used interchangeably, but an argument is the piece of information that's passed from a function call. So technically speaking, this is an argument and this is a parameter. But don't worry, most people, including me, use these interchangeably. So if you want to call this parameter, as long as you know that this is a parameter, this is an argument, or this is an argument, this is a parameter, doesn't matter. You can switch it around. I think I said the same thing, but no worries about that. Let's continue on. Now that you've seen how we can define a function and how we can call that function with a bit of information being sent to it, it's time to delve a little bit deeper and look at arguments, because believe it or not, arguments are a lot more, or can be a lot more intricate than you can first imagine. I don't know what I said, let's dive into arguments. Okay, so as you can see in this situation, we have two parameters, and this is very important to keep in mind. When you have two parameters, just like we've had one parameter, we need to provide two arguments right here, or you can use them interchangeably again. I copied the exact same function that I had in here and made some modifications. And now when I right click and I run, you can see, hello, Michael, your age is 28. So I just turned 28. Today is the 23rd of January, 2024. My birthday was on 16th. So as a late birthday present, leave me a like. Anyway, that's beside the point. As you can see, we've provided two arguments to this, but it's very important to keep in mind that the order in which you send these parameters is very important, because if I change this from Michael and then 28 to 28, then Michael, look at what happens. I right click and I run and I got hello 28, your age is Michael, which is a total disaster. So keep that in mind. I'm going to keep this mistake right here, and I'm going to duplicate this line twice using Ctrl D. So something very important is that you can also call a function multiple times. As you can see right here, we provided two new people, which are Kaylin, whose age is 9, and Jimmy, who's 58. Now let's go ahead and look at keyword arguments. Alright, so notice that we no longer have a random or wild output whenever we run this. So first, we still have this one, which is weird, but even though, okay, this should be 28, now it's no longer weird. So notice that because we use something in here that's called a keyword argument, and this is a name value pair that you pass to a function. So when you pass an argument to the function, there is no confusion, even though 28 is still the first parameter sent or argument sent. You can see because we've specifically told it that it's the age that's 28 and the name to print is Michael, there was no confusion and we got a proper output. Now the question is, what would happen if somebody decides that they don't want to provide a parameter? How would we solve this issue? So right here, I can simply remove the age, and you can see that I have a big warning in here, and if I right click and I run, I get the error, and we've seen this before. So to avoid such issues, we can use something called a default argument. So right here at the top, next to age, I can say that by default, if no age is provided, the age is going to be 18. So now if I right click and I run, and I notice that we have some kind of warning in here, but that's okay. So notice in here, even though I had not provided the age, by default the age was set to 18. So if an argument for a parameter is provided in the function call, Python uses that argument value. If not, it uses the default value, because right here, for example, Kaylin is still 9 because 9 or the age was provided. Jimmy is still 58 because 58 was provided. But in this case, because we didn't provide the age to or for Michael, it was set to 18. Now we have a bit of a highlight here. You can see that it's expecting an integer and got a string instead. That's because Python realized that age has a default value of 18, which means it should be an integer. This is just a warning, it's not a huge problem. But even though this can save us in many situations, you have to keep in mind that the proper positioning still is important in here, because if I do the following, for example, I only have 28, when I right click and I run, the output becomes hello 28, your age is 18. Very weird. So the best way is to use keyword arguments with default values. And one last thing before moving on is making sure that you don't provide too many arguments. So as you can see right here, we've had hello world function being called, we provided it with a name, we provided it with an age, and then we just provided it with 22. What's this 22? I don't know, neither does the function, so when we run, we get an error, and if we read the error, you can see that hello world takes from 1 to 2 positional arguments. Notice, why does it say takes from 1 to 2 and not just 2? Because we already told it that age has a default value, which means we can provide it with 1 to 2 positional arguments, but 3 were given, which gives us an error. Okay, so now that you've seen how a function is defined, and we've looked a little bit deeper into arguments and how they work, now it's time to move on and use functions in a better way, because they don't always have to display something. Functions can also return something to you. So let's delve into that. All right, so right here we have a return statement inside of our function, something that's very new. And you'll know that return is different than everything else because it has a different color. This is something very helpful about our IDE. So basically what happens is the function that is calculator, and as you can see, it takes in 3 different variables, x, y, and z, or 3 different points of information or arguments, parameters, whatever you want to call them, and then it calculates the result, which is x plus y plus z, and then returns that result. Now what happens in here is that we actually call the calculator function provided with the 3 parameters that it needs, and then because of this return statement, the value of result is stored in the variable value, and then when we print out, the value is, well, 23, because 5 plus 12 plus 6 is 23, I believe so. Yes, it is, because 12 and 6 is 18, plus 2 from the 5 and then 3, 23. All right, anyway, that's me with math. So, as you can see, we can also change this to have a default value. So when we change and we say that z now is equal to 0, we can actually remove the 6 from here, and now when I right click and I run, you can see that I get 17, so we only have to provide 2 numbers. And also keep in mind that a function can return any type of value. So I'm going to change this right here slightly. Actually, I will duplicate it and I will comment it out using Ctrl//, and I will say, instead of having result equals x plus y plus z, I'm going to put 2 square brackets around and a comma in between them. So now this becomes what? It becomes a list, exactly. So when I right click and I run, you'll see that now this is a list that's being outputted. And we can make sure that it's a list, first of all, by hovering over it. You can see that the value is a list, but we can also check with or try to access a value. And what do you think the output of this is going to be? Try to think about it. Yes, exactly. We access 12 because it was a list that contained x, 5 at position 0, 12 at position 1, and 0 at position 2. We can even make sure of that. And finally, before moving on, let's go ahead and look at using a function inside of a while loop. Okay, so now what I did is I created a while loop, and what this while loop does is it keeps asking the user to enter 3 values, or enter the values you want to add together. So we have number 1, number 2, and number 3, and finally we print it out in the result. Now this will give you a small hint that the output is not gonna look like we expect. So I will right click and run, and first of all it asks us enter the values you want to add. I'm going to say 20, 30, and 1. All right, the result of the calculator is 20,301. Not a very good calculator. So what do you think happened in here? Usually 20 plus 30 is 50, plus 1 should be 51. Instead we get this huge number. So again, as I told you, the highlight right here should give you a hint if you want to pause the video and think about it. We've already seen this before, especially in the previous video. So what happened in here is if I hover over this, it tells me that expected type int got str instead. Well, if you remember from the previous video, we said that when we're working or when we're getting an input, it's always a string. So we have to convert it into integers. So now when I right click and I run, yes, stop and run, 20, 31, as we expected, we got 51. If I try 10, 15, 99, there we go. Let's try some big numbers and see what happens. There we go, they are all calculated. And of course, in here, we have to make sure that the inputs are digit and that the users has some way of breaking out, because as you can see, this goes infinitely. But now we're focusing on what we're working on, which is making sure that we know how a function is called inside of a while loop. If you want to expand on this and make sure that everything is correct, I highly recommend that you do. Okay, so we've defined the functions, we've seen multiple arguments and we've delved deeper into arguments, and we've also seen how we can return values. But so far, all the arguments that we've been working with were predetermined. So we knew that the calculator would take X, Y, and Z. We knew that the hello world would take the name and the age and whatever. What if the number of arguments was arbitrary? What if we want to send 5, maybe 10, maybe 50 arguments and parameters to our function? How would we handle that? Let's go ahead and look at that. Okay, so as you can see, we've created a function that we've seen before, nothing too special except for this args right here. And this args has something very special behind it, that is the asterisk. This is called an asterisk. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, I believe so. So the asterisk in the parameter name, for example, right here, it's the asterisk args. By the way, this could have been called anything. This can have been called X. It's just customary to call it args. And basically the asterisk tells Python to make a tuple called args containing all the values this function has received. So we basically are packing all of the different arguments into a tuple and sending it. And if you're not sure of that, you can, of course, you don't have to take my word for it. You can always print out the type of args. And if I right click and I run, you can see that it is of class tuple. Now what happens in here, once you understand that this is a tuple, and again, if you don't remember what tuples are, you can always go back to the video about lists. Once you understand that it's a tuple, it's very easy to look at this for loop and say, all right, so we're going through every single element inside of the arg and we're extracting the number from it, and then we're adding it to the total. Finally, after calculating all of the values inside of the arg, we get total. So as you can see in here, we provided 5 different numbers, but if we wanted, we can provide an extra one. So when I right click and I run, it gets calculated, and we didn't have to add anything right here at the top. So let's say I add another number. There we go. I can add as many as I want, and this is very, very helpful. Even more crazy is you can, for example, add something like this, where you just add a Michael. And if I right click and I run, you can see that of course it causes an error. Why? Because we're trying to add, the total is an integer, and we're trying to add a string to it, which of course causes an error. But the error wasn't caused, now notice, we actually were able to get through to the function. So the function was called, the only problem was that you cannot add strings and numbers. But what if we actually wanted to provide a specific name? So as you can see right here, we've provided 2 parameters or 2 arguments. One of them is the name and the second one is the star args. And this is again where positions are the way you position your arguments is very crucial. We provided the name first, and then everything else will be packed into a tuple and sent as an arg. So when I right click and I run, you can see that now it tells me that the sum is 180 Mr. Michael. If I change this to Kalen, for example, right click and run, it says 180 for Mr. Kalen. So Python matches the positional and keyword arguments first and then collects any remaining arguments in the final parameter. And finally, let's look at keyword arguments. That means when we have many different keyword arguments. Okay, so look at what we've just written. This, like, if you take a look at this, it really looks like very advanced and complicated code. But if you know your stuff and you've watched my videos up to this point, then these should be very, very easy. So first of all, we've defined a function. Already done that before. Next, we have username and email. Pretty straightforward so far. And then we have this weird thing right here, 2 asterisks, not just 1 but 2, and then we have kwargs. What the heck is even that? Anyways, inside we have the profile, which has the username and the email. Then we have a for loop right here, and by the way, this is a dictionary. If you're not sure what dictionaries are, you need to make sure to go back into the lesson about dictionaries. I will link it at the top. And in here we create a for loop that has attribute, value, kwargs.items, and then we use the attribute to set some specific keys in the profile. So I'm not going to delve too deep into this because I've already covered .items and all of that in the dictionaries video. But just to let you know, item allows you to go through a dictionary. Items allows you to go through the key value pairs of a dictionary, and then the attribute is set as a key and the value is set to the value. And what does that mean? That means that the kwargs, or keyword arguments, is what is its type? Come on, I can already hear you saying it. Kwargs are going to be of type dictionary. So keyword arguments basically this is a feature that is useful when you have a function that accepts a flexible number of keyword arguments. Like, for example, right here, we have a user profile. We're trying to create a new user, and we don't know what this user is going to be providing us. How much information does this user want to give us? He can give us his name, he can provide us with his email, but he decides to give us his age, his location, and his interests. Maybe other people don't want to give us their interests, but in this case, he did provide us with his interests and location. So we have to take all of these into account. This is why we have the kwargs. So the *args is when we have an unknown number of arguments, and the kwargs is when we have an unknown number or arbitrary number of keyword arguments. And I hope this is very simple to you, especially if you've already worked with dictionaries in the previous video. This all should be a piece of cake when you break it down. Okay, fellow Python programmers, congratulations on making it this far. If you have, please make sure to tell me in the comments. I would love to hear it. If you have any questions, of course, you can always leave them down below. Now that you've understood what functions are, you've seen this very complicated stuff about keyword arguments and arbitrary number of arguments. Crazy stuff. And now it's time for a bit of a challenge for you to test out your knowledge. So let's go ahead and delve, and it's also going to be a mini project to test out your knowledge and the things that you've learned so far. So let's look into it. Okay, congratulations, you are now a proud owner of a bookstore. Then when I was making this, I realized that the bookstore is just called a library. But anyways, congrats, you have been hired to create an application that handles various library and book needs. Let's look at these. First, you'll need to create a global list of available books. And when I say global, global means a variable that is declared outside of any and all functions. So it's a variable that's not part of a function, it's outside of a function. And it can be used throughout the code. Create a function that takes a title, an author, and an ISBN number. If you don't know what an ISBN number, I'm also not sure what it is. I just know that it's some kind of standard thing. If you go into Amazon, you can find the ISBN number for any book. As parameters, so 3 parameters, and as a dictionary with title, author, and ISBN to available book list. So we have a list of dictionaries, and each dictionary has 3 key value pairs that are title, author, and ISBN number. Next, the ISBN gets a default value of 0. These should be 10 digits because maybe somebody just hasn't remembered what this is. And in here you can choose whether you'd like to have this default value an integer or a string. It comes back to you, or maybe at some point it has to change. Write a function that prints out all the available books. You can do this. Create a function that allows someone to borrow an unlimited number of books. That's where you have to figure out how to make sure that the user can have an unlimited number of books. This function takes in the titles someone wishes to borrow and goes through them and checks if all of these titles are available. So even before someone can borrow a book, you need to make sure that it is in the book. And also don't forget that when you actually borrow a book, you have to remove it from the available books. So something to keep in mind. And okay, so sometimes I forget what my challenge points are. And finally, you'll need to add books using the function that you made using loops. Sorry, I had to make this weird sentence because I didn't have any more space. So at the bottom or in the description or in the pinned comment, I'm going to leave you with a list of tuples that are the books that you can add. And you have to use a loop. And of course, once you create the function that takes in the title, author, and ISBN number, you take this function and you use a loop to go through and add all of these books to your available books, and of course then print out all the books and borrow some books. Make sure that everything works. So pause the video right now and go do the challenge. Okay, so first step is just making the global variable. Maybe some of you were confused. They're like, oh my god, where should I have started? There you go. If you want, this is the first point. I know global sounds crazy, but it's nothing more than just declaring a variable. Okay, so this is the function that will allow us to add a book. As you can see, it takes in 3 parameters, title, author, and the ISBN number, and then it appends to the available books list. And you can see right here that I just wanted to make sure that I have had enough space. So .append, and I add what? A complete dictionary where I have title, author, and ISBN as the keys, and I also have the title, author, and ISBN as the values. And notice when I double click on them, these are the parameters sent to my function. And finally, just for the sake of testing things, I added book added with the title so that we know, with a bit of a indentation. Okay, so this is the function that will allow us to list all of our books. First of all, I just said these are the available books. I went through all of the available books and put it in the default variable that is book. And then I added a bit of a \t in here, just so, again, a bit of indentation. And then we print out the book's title, and notice that we access the values of this dictionary using the key names. Again, should go back to the video if you're not sure what's happening. Right here by the author, and finally the ISBN. And again, because I didn't have any more space in here, I just hit enter. The output should not change. Okay, so this is our function right here that allows us to borrow books. The first hard step was making sure that you understood that we need to add this asterisk behind the titles because the user can borrow 1 book, 2 books, 17,000 books. I hope he doesn't. Next, we have a for loop that goes through all the titles. Remember, this is a tuple. So we go through all the titles. Then inside of that, we go through all the books. And then for each book, we check if the book at the title is equal to title. So that we make sure that this title that the user is looking for, okay, is available in the available books. So we have to go through all the titles and then go through all the books and check if that book, at any point, if we find that book equal to the title, we remove that book from the available books and we print out that we've borrowed it, and then we break out because we want to break out of this loop right here and go back to the for loop right here. And then finally we have this else statement which tells us that the book was not found in case, well, the book wasn't found. Alright, so right here what I did is I simply copied the sample books that I had, and then I created a for loop that goes through these sample books. And because we have a list of tuples, which means we get book set as an element, and each element would be a tuple, and then I access the first one, which is the name of the book, the second element, which is the name of the author, and finally the ISB number. So when I right click and I run, as you can see, we get an error because tuple index is out of range. Why? Because right here, as you can see, some of these were missing their ISB number. And I left this intentionally because I thought, well, some of these should take the default value of 00 that we provided right here at the top. So to avoid this, I'm going to simply set these again, and of course the ones that you'll have will already have the proper numbering, so don't worry about it. Now if I right click and I run, you can see that I get this. So book added, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Great Gatsby, all of these very, very nice books. I haven't read any of them except for this one, I believe. Don't think I'm that smart. Oh, and The Hobbit, also very nice book. Okay, and finally in here what we did is we listed all the books, borrowed a couple of books, and then listed the books again just so we can see if the available books actually changed. So if I right click and I run, boom, as you can see, this is what we get. First we have the books added. Next we have the available books. These are our available books. As you can see, each book has the name by a certain author, and finally the ISBN number. And you can see right here that we borrowed 1984, that's great. We borrowed War and Peace, excellent, but the book not found, the Odyssey. Why is that? Well, I did something on purpose, and that is I added an extra space. And remember, these are strings, so they are very, very, first of all, case sensitive, and second of all, the space is considered a character as well. So the book not found, the Odyssey. Finally, we borrowed another book, that is Catcher of the Rhine, and another book that I tried to find, The Lord of the Rings, but I didn't find it. Now, if we print out the list of books again, you can see that 1984 is missing, War and Peace is missing, what else is missing in here? Catcher of the Rhine is also missing, but the Odyssey, because it wasn't borrowed, is still here. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, congratulations. That was a long one. I think this is going to be a very long video, but it is filled with value. I made sure to cover almost everything in functions. Of course, I would need a lot more hours to cover everything, but you've learned a lot. You've learned how to define a function, you've learned how to present it with arguments, you've learned how to present it with multiple and sometimes arbitrary number of arguments, and you also learned how you can use it inside of a loop, and finally you tested out all of your knowledge with the mini project. Now, in the next video we're going to be looking at object-oriented programming, so you should click on the video right here, and also you should like this video because I provided you with so much and you got to this point and my back is hurting and it was my birthday, and come on, just like the video and click right here. Let's go. Let's go. Continue your Python programming journey.